Please welcome to the stage Senator Al Franken.
How you doing?
Hello.
Thank you, Jaime.
Welcome.
Thank you.
I'd love to start by talking about what inspired you to write this book. A lot of the book is sort of timeless political memoir. We get your childhood and your career before the Senate and all of that. But as it gets closer to the current day, it starts to feel kind of urgent and specific to our moment. And so I was curious when you decided to write this book.
When I decided to write this book, it was this book is sort of about answering the question I get asked the most, which is being a United States Senator as much fun as working on Saturday Night Live? And the answer to that is no. Why would it be? But it's the best job I've ever had because you get to improve people's lives. And so a lot of this is also about the tension of having been a comedian and a satirist pretty much all my life, and then making this transition. That's the question I get asked second most is how did I make that transition? So and I didn't. I felt free to start writing this after I was reelected because my first election was 312 votes margin, and we had a recount, we had a legal proceeding, and so I just had my wife and I were going to have a vacation, 6 days up at a lodge in northern Minnesota. She was in Washington with her grandchildren, and she got sick, and we were going to go to Africa immediately after that vacation on a congressional delegation trip. So she wanted to just rest up for that. So I ended up, in a cabin for 6 days, and had threatened to myself to write about this, so I started writing about it, and I was worried that, it'd just become The Shining or something. And, but it didn't. It was a lot of fun, and it actually helped me think about being a senator. And so I try to tell people how I make this transition, how I made it. It had its hairy moments. It was that first campaign was very ugly. They took every thing that I'd ever said or written in comedy and put it through this. You'd be interested in this machine. It's called the dehumorizer. And it had a lot of technology from Silicon Valley. And what it does is decontextualize anything you ever wrote as a joke and just takes out all the irony, hyperbole, anything that you've done, and leaves it as something that you can attack. And they did that. And so, for example, I wrote a piece, I don't know, in around 1999 or 2000 about the internet and how parents should kind of monitor what their kids are doing on the internet. And I wrote what I think is a very conservative joke. And I said that, the internet is great. My son used the internet to do a great 6th grade report on bestiality. And he downloaded a lot of great images, and the kids in the class just love them because, at that age, they're just sponges. And so that was turned into an ad, which is Al Franken jokes about bestiality. It kind of comes from infinity and then goes through the drone, Al Franken, And so there was a lot of that. And so I won by 312 votes, and I felt that the people of Minnesota deserved to know I was there for a serious purpose. So I built my own dehumorizer, my staff, and I kind of showed people that I was going to, Minnesotans especially, that I was going to be a workhorse and not a show horse, and I did that. I won re-election by a very comfortable amount, and it's freed me up to be a workhorse with a sense of humor, to be funny again.
Yeah. Before we go into talking about your work in the Senate, I do want to ask one question about your comedy, because it was, you moved pretty quickly through your SNL and comedy writing years in the book. But one thing that really struck me was you write about one of your most famous characters, Stuart Smalley, who is actually, is this ridiculous mockery of a character in a lot of ways, but actually came from a really sincere inspiration.
Yeah, I don't think of him as a mockery of a character, but basically what happens, and I talk about in the campaign, my wife Franny, I was being attacked all the time through those kind of ads, and she is an alcoholic. She's a recovering alcoholic, and there was a period where that it was tough, obviously, on her and on our marriage, and but she talked about how I stuck it out with her, and she wanted to talk about my character. And she did an ad. She sat down with Mandy Grunwald, who was our media consultant, and did a beautiful ad. It's in a chapter called Franny Saves the Campaign. And she just wanted to talk about how not only did I, stand with her and support her, but also I wrote a couple movies about this. One called A Man Loves a Woman with Meg Ryan and Andy Garcia, and she wanted to know people did this. She said something in the ad that just made me cry and made Chuck Schumer cry, which is actually easier to do than you might think. But she said, and in this ad they showed pictures of us and our kids and stuff. She said, how can a mother of two such beautiful children be an alcoholic? And it spoke to the shame that a lot of women feel, and alcoholics feel. And it just touched a nerve. And an anchor at the CBS affiliate in Minneapolis said, this is the best political ad of the year because it's actually an ad that could help people. And 2 days after the ad ran, we had a debate in a gymnasium. The place was jam full and people on the floor and in the bleachers. When she entered the room, she got a standing ovation. And I wouldn't have won without that ad. And I would have lost by a lot, I imagine. And so during that time, during that period of our lives, I was at SNL and I started going to Al-Anon, which is for family members and friends of alcoholics. And I learned a lot about myself in that. And one of the things I learned, which I'm kind of embarrassed to say, is that I learned in Al-Anon meetings that you can learn stuff from people who at first blush don't seem smart. And my parents would always emphasize education, and you learn from people who are educated and smarter than you. My dad didn't graduate high school, so it was very important. And there was a guy who Stuart was a little modeled after, who said, that the higher power had put an apartment in his life one week. And I just went, it was here in New York. I was here in New York. And the next week, he said something that just hit me so hard. That was about his experience. And so I made a character who was very vulnerable and kind of, at first blush, an idiot. But to try to explain what recovery was. And so that's where Stuart Smalley was from.
Yeah. And so as so much of your career can be defined, your comedy career can be defined as satire, as a satirist. I mean, what's the sort of the impulse behind that? Because with Stuart, you were trying to really communicate something sincere.
Yeah. I've done really stupid comedy, you know, Belushi as Liz Taylor choking on a chicken bone. You know, I mean, that's just Julia Child bleeding to death. You know that. You know, so I've done all kinds, but I've always done political satire, and it really comes from we very early when I was young, the civil rights movement was happening, and my dad, we watched the news while we ate dinner, and we had tray tables. My mom made a great dinner. It wasn't a TV dinner. It was a really nice dinner, but we would watch the news. And this was during the civil rights struggle. And when sheriffs would put fire hoses and billy clubs and dogs on demonstrators, my dad would point to the TV and say, "No Jew can be for this. No Jew can be for this." And that was a very big lesson for us, for me and my brother, about justice and why that matters. And it's one of the reasons actually, my dad was a Republican. But when Barry Goldwater voted against the Civil Rights Bill and was the nominee, he became a Democrat and stuck with that. And so we lost the South because of the Civil Rights Bill, but we gained my dad and me. So I always cared about politics, and I always wrote political satire, and I'm very proud of the work that I did in satire on the show. I write about this. Jim Downey is a guy I wrote a lot with. He was a very thoughtful conservative. I like to think I'm a thoughtful progressive. We did not feel that the job of the show was to have a political bias. We felt the job of the show was to do well-observed political satire, and Jim had a thing, we want to reward people for knowing stuff, but not punish them for not knowing stuff. So I think we wrote very well-observed, intelligent satire that everyone enjoyed.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier the dehumorizer of the campaign, and then bringing that into your own work in the Senate and you know, focusing on...
I'll give you an example of the dehumanizer while I'm in the Senate. When the Supreme Court voted 5-4 on marriage equality, I thought that was a big day, and I wanted to put out a press release saying, you know, I congratulate the court for making this decision. Or actually, it was going to be Senator Franken is very happy with the court's decision, allowing everybody to marry the person they love. But Senator Franken felt that Justice Scalia's dissent was very gay. And my team said no.
Really?
Yeah, no, you can't put that out. Now, this is after I had won re-election, so I thought, oh, come on, you know. And so we didn't put that out, but I got it in the book.
Yeah.
It's in the book. So there's a lot of stuff in the book that didn't survive our own dehumorizer. Yeah.
But even as all of that gets stripped away and saved for future books, you have found a kind of performance venue in your work in the Senate, which is committee hearings. And it might not have been that way if this weren't the age of internet video. But, you know, I sat and watched your questioning of Betsy DeVos and other, you know, cabinet nominees and things like that. So it seems like that committee work is really high profile, especially, you know, how do you end up on the committees that you're on in the Senate?
The leader of your party assigns you to them. And I got there, I had an 8-month process, a recount and a legal process, so I got there last. So I got what Harry had left over. And so, you know, I got judiciary, and he said, oh, you know, I asked for certain committees. He said no, and then he told me what I had. And he said, you'd be great in judiciary. And I said, I don't know if you've noticed this, Harry, but there are a lot of lawyers in the Senate, and I ain't one of them. And he said, that's why that's why you'd be great. And he was bullshitting. He was just, that's what he had, So I'm on judiciary, and I'm really happy I am. I'm really happy I am. I've done a lot in judiciary. And I'm also, and later I got what I did ask for, which was the HELP committee, Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions, which is not that important unless you care about your health or your kids' health or your parents' health or their education or your education, or if you plan to work sometime during your life, or maybe retire. Other than that, it doesn't have much jurisdiction. And then I'm on the Energy Committee now, but at that time I was put on the Aging Committee. And Aging Committee is a non-legislative committee, and I actually said to Harry, aging, are people aging? And he didn't know that I was kidding. And Harry's got a very good sense of humor, but he didn't know me then. And so, anyway, that's how you get your committee assignments.
Okay.
That's the answer to that question.
And so with, these sort of hearings and sessions of questioning being put on the internet and for everyone to see them now, you don't have to just sit at home and watch C-SPAN in order to catch it.
Right.
They can be very entertaining.
And that's a relief for everybody here who used to do that.
I know, it was really interfering with our work, just a little TV. But, they can be very entertaining and certainly galvanizing. But I'm curious, within the Senate, how those hearings function. Do they actually affect votes, or what you see the role of those performances to be?
Well, I don't consider it a performance. I consider it a hearing, and I consider hearings very serious things where you're representing I'm representing the people of Minnesota in those hearings, and I want to ask questions that I want the answers to. Sometimes the effect of the hearing, we did not stop people from, we did not stop Betsy DeVos from getting confirmed. The vice president, for the first time in history, had to come down and cast a tie-breaking vote to get her confirmed. But I felt that she did not know education policy, which for the Secretary of Education is an issue, I think. And so I demonstrated that in my questioning. Sometimes the questioning is something that exists for the record. In the judiciary hearings, I asked Jeff Sessions a question that he responded to by saying that he had not met with any Russians during the campaign. That turned out not to be true. And he's under oath, and that's a serious thing. But we didn't find that out till well after he'd been confirmed. And there's some news breaking today, possibly about that, about Senator Leahy and I, after we were not satisfied with his answers about why he had not disclosed his meetings with Russians, which seems to be something that there's a pattern of this, shall we say, in the Trump administration. They aren't acting like people who have nothing to hide. And because of his not answering my question, or answering my question in the way he did, not truthfully, he ended up recusing himself. And because he recused himself, Rod Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General, assigned the special prosecutor ultimately. And so that's why we have a special prosecutor. So sometimes you do things to get things on the record.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in the book, you also write about being friends with many of your Republican colleagues in the Senate. And you write about how you're friends with them even though you vigorously disagree with them.
Sure.
And I would love to hear you talk about that a little, because it seems like it's not just, oh, I think we should tax it 18%. I think we should tax it 14%. These are huge, almost moral disagreements. And
Yeah.
I think that it can be very relevant to those of us not working in the Senate too, because they're your colleagues, but some of us have friends or family or colleagues with whom we have these similar, like very, very deep disagreements. So how do you
Sure.
maintain those relationships?
Well, we're a workplace, and you want to be a good coworker. You want to the way to get things done in the Senate is to have a good relation. You're like living in a town that has 100 people in it, and your word has to be good. And that's more than anything. And I bonded with a number of Republicans right away, just with humor. Jim DeMint, a very right-wing senator at the time from South Carolina, now he's head of the Heritage Foundation, came up to me on the floor the first day I was there and said, how are things on the far left? And I said, they're great. How are things on the nutcase right? And he laughed, and we continued having a relationship while he was in the Senate, based on just giving each other crap. But it was a good relationship. Lindsey Graham is really funny. When he was like 16th, 17 in the presidential race, I went up to him and said, Lindsey, if I were voting in the Republican primaries, I'd vote for you. And he said, that's my problem. And now, I had one colleague, Tom Coburn, who he didn't seem to have a sense of humor. So my first 4 or 5 exchanges with him were not good. And I went up to him, Tom, I said, can I take you to lunch? He said, tell you what, you take me to breakfast. And Tom was he's kind of called Dr. No because he was a doctor, a medical doctor, before he went into the Senate. And he also was a very, very big on spending. He wanted to balance the budget, and he said no to a lot of things and used his privileges to stop a lot of stuff. So we go to breakfast the next day, and at the beginning of breakfast, I said, look, we're in the Senate dining room. I said, over the next 45 minutes, we can talk about anything. We can talk about politics, talk about our families, talk about our careers before here. But let's have fun, okay? And he goes, okay, fine, we'll have fun. So I said, okay, now, let's talk about careers. You were a doctor before you came here. Let me ask you something. To be a doctor in Oklahoma, do you have to have any formal education? And he said, yes, you've got to go to medical school. And I said, okay, that was a joke, you see. And you see, that's what I did for my career. And then we had a delightful breakfast in which I taught him what jokes were and what the proper response was. And he wrote me a note afterwards that he had a delightful breakfast, and we got along really well. And so I write about Ted Cruz, who seems to be the exception to the rule.
Yeah. We're going to open it up to questions in a minute. So if you have a question, you can line up at one of the microphones. But I want to ask one more question. So you point out in the book that once President Obama was elected, the Republican plan in Congress just became obstruction.
Yes.
Stop him from getting anything done. And, that hasn't changed about, they still are trying to stop anything.
No, I mean, it has changed. We have a different president. And no, that was, Mitch McConnell said something that kind of shocked me. He said, our number one goal is to see to it that Barack Obama is a one-term president. And I wasn't shocked that he thought that, but I was shocked that he said it out loud, because I think our number one goal should be to improve people's lives, to provide a world-class education for our kids, to make sure that our economy is working, to make sure that veterans get the care they need. There's a lot of things that must come before partisan politics. So I was shocked about that, but he used the rules of the Senate to try to stop Barack Obama from having any achievements. And I have a chapter called The Great Curdling, and things curdled during that period and got very bad. When I first got there, it was bad, and I asked a colleague who had been there for about 30 years, I said, was it always this bad? No, 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 no. I said, has it ever been worse than this? Oh, yeah. Remember when that guy got caned? And I said, Charles Sumner, who got caned right before the Civil War? He goes, yeah, that was worse.
Okay, that's reassuring.
Yeah.
So, it's something that, so you write in the book, by the time you read this, Republicans may well have succeeded in repealing some or all of the Affordable Care Act, but I'm willing to bet they won't have succeeded in replacing it, because the truth is they've never been interested in addressing the central challenge, which I think applies sort of broadly to that curdling. So if they're not trying to pass legislation that will improve or replace Obamacare,
I mean, this is the thing about the book is we did education together in the Health Committee, and Lamar Alexander was very good in that process. And we did it. It took us a while, but we ultimately passed a bill that we all were happy with. And we can do it. So it depends on the issue. But on health care, I don't think the Republicans thought Donald Trump would become president. I thought they assumed Hillary would be, and they could still continue to use Obamacare as just as a political bludgeon, and I don't think that they have given. Donald Trump said that nobody knew that healthcare was complicated until he figured out that it was complicated. It's very complex, our healthcare system, and I don't think that many of my Republican colleagues, and I know this for sure because I've talked to many of them, have really thought through what to do, what to replace the Affordable Care Act with. So that's what I was writing about. And we have, of course, we're seeing a process I think is the wrong process in the Senate right now, where 13 Republicans are behind closed doors. They're not currently, they're on recess. But they're trying to come up with something. We should be doing this. There should be an open process. We should be doing it like we did the Affordable Care Act through committees.
All right, we're going to open it up to questions now.
All right. Hi, Senator. Thank you for coming.
Sure, thank you.
I imagine you probably get this question all the time, but for people who are not happy with how politics are going in the U.S. right now, what can we do about it?
If you're not happy, get involved, get engaged. The throwing your hands up and saying things are terrible is not a way to make our system work better. It just leaves it to the people who are cynical and don't care. So I am very much heartened by the reaction that we've had. The Women's March on Washington was an amazing event, and people going to town hall meetings, I think, helped defeat the House health care bills that were the predecessor to this horrible bill. Get involved in an advocacy group. If you care about mental health, then advocate for funding for mental health, for getting more mental health providers. If you care about climate change, an existential threat to us all, get involved in that. And you'll be surprised. You become a foot soldier in an organization, how quickly you become an officer and how quickly you're lobbying Congress, and it makes a difference. It really does.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You said earlier that your sort of overarching goal is to serve the people of Minnesota
Yep.
when you're in the Senate. How much do phone calls or emails from your constituents influence your work?
They do, and the ones that make the biggest difference are the ones that clearly aren't like from some AstroTurf group where you get the same written email if you're writing an actual, but they make a difference.
I'm Joy. I actually graduated last year from Carleton College.
Oh, great school.
And speaking of getting involved, I've actually been to your office multiple times with Sam and Sylvia and other J Street delegations. I was really excited to hear that you were coming. I am sort of curious because when I speak to a lot of people my age, they're starting to lose faith. They're going out to these marches and going to town halls, and it seems to them like the Democratic Party, in a lot of ways, is playing defense, and that to a certain extent makes sense for where we are right now. I'm curious if you could speak to any coordinated efforts on behalf of the party to really go back on the offense and take back some power rather than waiting until the elections in 2018.
Well, we have a system, and elections have consequences, so it's hard for us to be on offense. We're on offense in our messaging. We're on offense in many ways, but we are in the minority in both houses, and the White House is controlled by Donald Trump's the president. So I try to play offense. I try to play offense in the hearings. And
are there coordinated efforts though? Because I see you playing offense, and I see Senator Warren and Keith Ellison playing offense, but are there coordinated efforts to do so?
Yeah, Democrats sometimes have problems with messaging. The way I like to put it, and I put it in the book, is that our bumper stickers always end with "continued on next bumper sticker." So sometimes, it's not like we're not trying. Believe me, we're trying to be on offense at all times. But
if that's the problem, what are you doing to fix it?
What am I going to do to fix it? I myself am doing my job best I can, and I'm being as aggressive as I can when it's appropriate. And in this book, I write about victories that matter in people's lives. My first bill I passed 2 weeks after I got to Congress. My co-sponsor, Johnny Isaacson, a Republican from Georgia, was to get service dogs to veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan who have PTSD and traumatic brain injury and other invisible wounds, because these dogs help them tremendously. And that is, to me, I've gotten increased funding for mental health in schools. That is an enormous victory for me that I really care about. I'm on the offensive, believe me, and we are on the offensive on this health care bill, this terrible, awful health care bill that has an $880 billion cut in Medicaid, which the president said he would never cut Medicaid. We're playing that out, and people are freaked out about it in rural Minnesota, I can tell you that, and all over Minnesota, but I'm co-chair of the Rural Health Caucus. So I go all around rural Minnesota. I'm on the offense. I'm doing the best I can. Chuck Schumer's doing the best we can. Tom Perez is doing the best he can. We will fall short and disappoint you all the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. If you look at different types of charts, if you look at charts of income inequality, if you look at charts that examine congressional legislation compared to public opinion, and most importantly, if you look at statistical data of outcomes of congressional campaigns and congressional elections versus the amount of money spent on the campaigns, our democracy resembles more of an oligarchy. If you can say, as you can in the States, that you can pretty much predict with high accuracy the outcome of an election based on the money spent on it, it's hard to claim that this is a democracy, because the people's opinion clearly matters much less than the money spent. Given that, it seems like our democratic process is kind of like running with its hands tied behind its back. And how can we really achieve anything significant before we address this very serious problem of campaign financing? And why do we not hear more about this from Congress?
You know, one of the worst parts of having Donald Trump as president instead of Hillary Clinton is we have Neil Gorsuch now as the 9th justice. I was hoping that Hillary would win. I fought very hard for her so that we would get a justice who would overturn Citizens United, which is one of the most pernicious decisions we've seen. It's interesting that Justice Kennedy wrote the majority opinion in that. He said this doesn't present even the appearance of corruption. And he said that because of the internet, everyone will be able to see who gave what to whom. And he envisioned, and their decision envisioned disclosure. And we tried to get disclosure done, and every Republican voted against it. At that point, we had 15, this is after Scott Brown had won in Massachusetts. They needed 41, and they had 41. You're absolutely right about this. I mean, you can say that Hillary spent more than Trump, and that was the big one. He got a lot of free media because people were entertained by him. But you're right. This is there's a book that Sheldon Whitehouse has written called Captured, which talks about how big corporations have sort of captured, and big special interests have captured a number of things, including through campaign finance stuff, our elections, the ability for people to get into court, our regulatory agencies sometimes get captured. The courts are captured. This is a basic problem. One thing I can say is that most Americans agree with you. The vast majority of Americans agree with you. But if you ask them what's their most important issue to you, it comes out 8th or 9th or 10th. It is an existential threat.
It should be first.
Yeah.
So who's championing this in the Senate?
Well, we are fighting for reform and losing, but it's people like Sheldon Whitehouse. It's people like I've been in this fight. It's been Elizabeth Warren, Bernie. I mean, Dick Durbin has always led for public financing of elections, and I agree with. I've been a co-sponsor of his legislation to do that. We just don't have. The Republican Party will not do this. So right now, we are not going to. We're not winning that one.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, Senator. Thanks for coming. You mentioned that you work with a lot of lawyers in Congress, and I'm wondering if you think that lawyers and prosecutors in particular are somehow more qualified to serve in Congress, or if perhaps lawyers are sort of more accommodating of doublespeak and dishonesty that I think frustrates us in politics.
Well, a lot of my colleagues are lawyers, and there's colleagues that I admire tremendously who are lawyers, and there are colleagues that I don't admire tremendously who are lawyers. I think probably when Harry said I'd be good on the committee because I'm not a lawyer, I actually think that I think I play a good role there because I think my training as a satirist, I see, I can spot inconsistencies. Satirists are trained in a certain kind of way, and because of the books I wrote, Lies and Lying Liars Who Tell Them a Fair and Balanced Look at the Right, or Rush Limbaugh is a Big Fat Idiot, and Other Observations, all very high-minded books of satire, train me to, and that's why I think I've had a high profile in the hearings, because I think I know how to frame things because of my training and know how to make something land. So we are making the laws, so being a lawyer has its upside. But I think you're right. I like to see people who aren't lawyers. By the way, I want to just say one thing very quickly, and I maybe shouldn't be so quick about this, but I write in the book because there's a lot of there's a lot of despair hanging on the room, and it's just there's hope here. In 2004, we lost the White House in a very, very close election, and George W. Bush. I think by then it was apparent that we had really been lied into the war, that they had made the decision to go to war and then kind of cooked the books, the evidence to get us there. And that was a very difficult defeat, but we came back. And it was because of things like Air America, which I was a radio host for. It was things like Media Matters, which answered the right-wing messaging machine in a very effective way. Center for American Progress, a progressive think tank. And in 2006, we took the Congress back, and in 2008, we had Barack Obama win the White House. And we had, for a moment, for a couple months, 60 votes. So we don't despair and get active is what I'm saying.
Hi, Senator. Thanks for coming. So we hear a lot about how the best way to resist the Trump administration, the GOP's current agenda, is to call our Congress people, call our senators. So I live in New York. New York City has very liberal Congress people and liberal senators. So I feel like calling them is maybe not as effective as calling or contacting swing representatives, swing senators. So do you have any suggestions for effective ways for people like me who live in liberal districts to put pressure on members of Congress or to help Democrats win control of the House back in 2018?
Well, yes, we have districts in America that are very blue, like in New York, or very red, like in if you look at a map of the country, you know where those are. So, I think that you guys could. Google does pretty well, right? So some of you, I think, are paid okay, and you can actually give money to candidates who are running in swing districts, for example, or to organizations that believe in the things you believe in. So there are, when I talked about advocacy, you can join advocacy groups that speak to everybody. If it's about an issue that you care about, if you care about housing, if you care about clean water, you can join advocacy groups that are national advocacy groups, and then you're talking about an issue that is about that lobbies everybody in Congress, or tries to speak to everybody, and not only that, but people in state houses and in local government, and all that is very, very important. There's an infinite amount to do, and you can find something to do if you work hard enough at it. But other than just call Chuck Schumer, probably you're right.
Sure.
Chuck's probably believes, or Kirsten Gillibrand probably. What I'm getting is they probably already agree with you. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Senator. Thank you
Hi.
for coming here today. I'm actually from Minnesota myself, and it's really heartwarming to see you looking out for the interests of Minnesotans, bringing the Minnesota nice to the Senate. But I think that there's another group of people who could really use your help, who could use some of the hope that you were talking about, and that's the people of New York City. I'm wondering what we can do here in New York to bring the spirit of Minnesota to our everyday lives.
Where are you from?
Minneapolis, Northeast.
I've heard of it. It starts from each of you. I want each of you to be nice today. I want it to emanate from this Google campus. Every person can just be nice. But in Minnesota, you're also passive aggressive. That's also, and talk like this, kind of, talk to your friend. Hey, how you doing?
Thank you.
You're welcome. So, who do we got here?
Oh, hi.
Yeah.
I'm going to try to do that. So.
Okay.
So thanks. So Sergey Brin said once, like in one of these talks in this room, so he had met Obama after Obama's re-election, and he suggested to Obama that the president disassociate from the Democratic Party just for the sake of like breaking down the division between the two parties, which is probably obviously ridiculous. But like Sergey wasn't joking, and so obviously he's smart. So I'm just wondering, he's getting at a real issue of like how the party barriers get in the way. So I'm wondering how ridiculous you think that is.
Very, very ridiculous. In the book, would you agree with this, that I kind of try to talk about how it really is, how it really works?
Yeah.
And not in a cynical way.
No.
This is how we're going to do the whole thing from now on. But that's just not going to happen. That wasn't going to happen. And the Republicans had done everything they could to defeat him. And no, he was not going to divorce himself from the Democratic Party.
But what if it's not a president? What if it's somebody else in that situation?
Well, people do that. I mean, Bernie Sanders is not a member of the Democratic Party. So people are free to do that, and people do that. But I'm a Democrat. I'm a Democrat because, and I start the book by why I'm a Democrat. And I'm a Democrat. I grew up in St. Louis Park, Minnesota. My dad didn't graduate high school. He was a printing salesman. I grew up in a 2-bedroom, 1-bath house, but I felt like the luckiest kid in the world because I was growing up middle class, at the height of the middle class in the 50s, in America, in Minnesota, in St. Louis Park, and I felt like I could do anything I wanted. And I don't feel like kids feel that way today, maybe, but when I went to college, I met my wife, and she didn't grow up that way. She grew up, her father died when she was 18 months old. She had a younger sister. Her mom was widowed at age 29 with 5 kids. And they made it because of Social Security survivor benefits. Sometimes they didn't have enough to eat, a lot of times. Sometimes the heat was turned off, and this is in Portland, Maine. Sometimes the phone was turned off. But they made it, and all the girls went to college on combinations of Pell Grants, which at that time paid for about 80% of a public college education, and scholarships. And my mother-in-law ended up going to college when the youngest, there was one younger than my wife, when the youngest went to high school, she got a GI loan. Her husband had fought in World War II. And that allowed her to go to college. She ended up being a teacher. She taught Title I kids, poor kids, so all her loans were forgiven. They tell you in this country to pull yourself up by the bootstraps. I think we all believe that, but first you have to have the boots. And the federal government gave Franny's family the boots. And that's what we believe in. We believe in creating opportunity for everybody. And I think that this president, witness his budget, witness his health care legislation, doesn't believe that. And that's why I'm a Democrat. Yes.
First of all, thank you, Senator, for leading by example and showing us that you can go from commenting on the process to actually doing something and living that. So thank you.
Thank you for saying that.
In terms of advocacy and what we care about, you could say a few people in this room care a little bit about the quality of information and how it's delivered.
Thank God. If you guys didn't, who would?
I'm very interested. There's a lot of noise between all of the information out there and how it gets to everyday people. And I'm very interested to find out from you how you cut through all that, and which medium have you found to be the most clear-cut channel to get directly from what you want to communicate to your constituents, because I've seen how you've done it through humor and books and over the years. And on a personal note, what you did on Air America Radio with Janine Garofalo and Rachel Maddow was on right before you, that helped me connect as a citizen. I was right out of college, just started in the tech industry, and in terms of, I homeschooled myself and went to community college and went to college. And now I work at Google 20 years later. It's my 20-year reunion this year. I'm now can afford to pay off my student loans 20 years later. I'm doing it this year in honor of my 20-year reunion. The things that you connected to me through radio, through just an audio channel alone, felt like an audience of one to me. Like I got the most as a citizen from that, from you, and you weren't even a senator yet. So now, as a senator, you speak directly to your constituents, I imagine. You also speak through the dehumorizer. What's the most effective channel, and how do you connect with your constituents the most, and like, how do you cut through all that?
Ed, my communications chief is here. We try to use any tool we can. We try to use social media. I try to do it when I have a platform, and if I have a platform in a hearing, I use it. Floor speeches, hopefully this is going to reach people. You know, this is why net neutrality to me is a huge First Amendment issue, and why I believe that people have to fight what the FCC is trying to reverse the open internet rule, and I think this is very, very dangerous. We've always had net neutrality in the internet, and it's from the very beginning when it was, you know, the ARPANET, or the DARPA had. I'm sorry, when DARPA had started it. We need to preserve that so that we have so that all information is treated equally. I think that's absolutely essential, and we can't have huge corporate interests, and especially internet service providers, deciding what information gets to flow free and what you have to pay for, etc. So this is, again, that's also an existential issue. We have many existential issues: campaign finance reform, net neutrality, climate change, for God's sakes. You know, we haven't discussed that. Well, we're at Google, so we should be discussing this. So that's one thing I've been leading the charge on, is net neutrality. I try to get my message out any way I can, and if you have anybody here can help us, let us know, okay? Thank you. And thanks for really kind words.
Thank you. Thanks. Unfortunately, I think that's all we have time for today, but thank you so much, Senator, for coming in to talk about it.
Thank you.